Welcome back. I'm Goblin, and we are going to read ghost stories. All of our tales tonight come from a wonderful website called Your Ghost Stories, and all of them are presented as real first-hand accounts, but you can decide for yourself. You know how there's a phobia for everything these days, right? Well, there's even one for knees. It's called genophobia, and I actually used to suffer from it. But I'm totally over it now. Yeah, I'm fine. But if you are a sufferer of genophobia, you might want to skip tonight's episode, because all of our stories will follow the theme backwards knees. In addition to reading the stories, I'm also going to mix in some creatures from folklore and some science that ties in with our theme. Now, let's get to our first ghost story. This story happened many, many years ago when I was very young, but the image is still clearly burnt into my memory. My first strange experiences began when someone started tickling me at night as I lay in bed. I'd look around to find no one there, though sometimes I'd have very vivid dreams of a specter-like thing with black eyes, smiling and standing over me as it tickled me. Another night, I woke up to the very real sensation of a hand covering my face. I could even feel its long, skeleton-like fingers wrapping across my cheeks. But when I peered nervously into the darkness of my room, I didn't see anything except the shadows. But the most haunting, chilling memory of all happened late one night. I was having a hard time sleeping, and I laid in my bed thinking. Then I heard noises and bumps coming from the kitchen. I could hear thuds, and it sounded like someone had walked up the stairs from the basement into the kitchen, and now they were doing something in there. I thought I'd even heard something brush up against or slightly move the doorknob to the door separating my room with the kitchen. The door never opened though, and I hid my head underneath the blankets for a minute or so. Eventually, curiosity got the best of me though, as the noises proceeded out of the kitchen and into the living room. From my bedroom, I could view the living room, which was lit up by a street lamp outside the window. Because of this, I could get a full view of the very grotesque creature that walked out of the kitchen and into the living room. What is most peculiar and most ugly about this thing that walked straight into our living room was that it was not the shape of a human. Most importantly, its legs were distorted as if they had been severely broken. It walked like a chicken, with its knees turned the other way. It hunched over, and I could see that it had long arms and long fingers that hung down. I was scared out of my mind and hid underneath the blankets, closing my eyes and praying to myself. I've never seen it since that night, and it still haunts me to this day. I love finding stories like this on the website. This is not your average ghost story. Could it even be a ghost? The commenters on this story suggest several different ideas for what this disturbing creature may be. Banshees, astral critters, demons, and one I had not heard of before, a Sigbin. The Sigbin comes from Philippine folklore, and this culture is absolutely rich with fascinating mythology. I plan on doing at least one episode dedicated to Filipino ghost stories and folklore in the future. Sigbin are described as resembling a hornless goat that walks upright and backwards, crouched over with its head hanging low. It has also been described as looking like a cross between a kangaroo and a dog. It has long ears that it can clap like hands, and a tail that can be used as a whip. It's said to emit a pungent and nauseating odor. If what the author of the story saw was indeed a Sigbin, it is a good thing that they were not seen by the creature, because Sigbin seek out children and kill them for their hearts, which they fashion into amulets. Although it is said they only do this on Good Friday. They feast on corpses and attack humans, sucking their blood or causing them fatal illness by biting their shadow. After a Sigbin bites a person's shadow and makes them ill, they will wait by the victim's house, waiting for them to die, and then feast on their corpse. They are invisible by day, but you can tell one is near by their putrid odor. Those who practice black magic can create a Sigbin by mixing specific plants and oils in a jar, and can be commanded once they take their full form on full moons. Truly a fascinating and frightening creature. The story we read came from Idaho. Do you think Sigbin exist there? What about Montana, where our next story takes place? The title of our next story is Not Human, Not an Animal. One night, I lay awake in my bed, trying to fall asleep. I had an immensely eerie feeling, and I stared into the corners of my room, looking for something, but not sure what I was looking for. Then, I heard a noise from somewhere in the house, and I had the overwhelming feeling to stare through my bedroom door into the living room, where I had full view of the living room window. For several minutes, I craned my neck, staring through the door, watching. I held my breath and listened. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as the eerie feeling escalated. Just then, my heart jumped into my throat. I gasped and then covered my mouth with my hand to avoid screaming and letting the creature know I was there. A dark creature, silhouetted by the light coming through the window, walked slowly into the living room. But what it looked like and how it walked was like nothing I can describe that would give it justice. Its legs were inverted backwards, like a chicken's. It hunched its back as it walked, and held its skinny arms bent at its sides. The claw-like hands hung down, and its head was distorted and larger than appeared normal. I couldn't see any nose, but I could tell even from my angle that it had a strange, grotesque mouth. I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. I was so terrified that I quickly pulled the covers over my head and waited. I listened, unable to hear anything except for my beating heart. I felt pure terror. I had no idea what I had seen. Several minutes later, I managed to peek through my covers to the living room again. I didn't see it, but that didn't mean it hadn't moved to somewhere else. I watched for it, but didn't see it again. However, I still didn't feel safe. With every bit of courage I had, I ran out of bed, past the living room, and into my parents' bedroom, only feet away. There, I stayed until morning, staring at their bedroom door. Once again, in the comments of this story, a Sigbin is mentioned. One person describes Sigbin as looking like a mummified cat. Unfortunately, I couldn't find other folklore creatures that have backwards knees, but I did find several that had backwards feet. The first is called a Curupira, and it comes from Brazilian folklore. They inhabit the lush forests of Brazil and act as protectors to these beautiful, biodiverse environments. They can be described as small and dwarf-like, riding on the backs of peccaries, or as the size of an average adult human. Either way, they have flaming red hair and backwards feet. The legends of the Curupira are ancient, told to colonizers by the indigenous Tupi people of Brazil, perhaps as a warning to leave their lands alone. Since the feet of the Curupira face the opposite way, following their footprints would lead a hunter to the source of their path rather than tracking their destination. Doing so might lead a hunter into a remote area of the forest or even make them walk in circles, ultimately making them lost or confused. They also possess magical powers, such as the power to transmute their form and cause illusions, one example being a high-pitched whistling sound that they will use to frighten and drive trespassers in their forest to madness. Finally, they will straight up attack and kill poachers who hunt for sport, take more than they need, or prey on animals who are caring for their offspring. Sounds like my kind of creature. From Dominican folklore comes the Siguapa, sirens and sorceresses that inhabit high and remote mountains. Some believe them to be harmless, and others say that they are cunning and deadly creatures. They are described as having dark blue or brown skin and are nude, but have long glossy hair that conceals their form, and of course, backwards feet. The purpose of them is to avoid capture, as it is said that they cannot survive captivity. However, there is a chance that you may catch a Siguapa on the night of a full moon if you track them using a black and white dog with polydactyly, or extra toes. Siguapa communicate only with animals, speaking in whines or chirps. They also sing beautiful and mournful songs, perching on rocks and leaving them wet with their tears after they have moved on. More sinister tales of Siguapa say that their backwards feet are used to leave tracks that will trap men who are trying to find them, lured in by their hypnotic song and bewitching female form. They will lead you back to their cave, and once you gaze into their eyes, you are ensnared, and with a kiss, they will suck the breath from your lips, until no life remains. I found some other interesting folklore creatures that I would like to share with you, but first let's read another ghost story. This one is called Weird White Crypto. This happened to a dear friend of mine when we were about middle school age and to whom I am still very close. The experience occurred in a trailer park in Norwalk, Iowa. There are several sprawling cornfields that border this mobile home property. My friend Josh lived here at this time, and on this particular occasion was hanging out with his friend James. On this night, Josh and his friend James were outside, trying to get his next-door neighbor to come outside and hang out with them. It was summertime, so the evening was warm and balmy. The skies were clear, and the moon, while not necessarily full, provided a lot of moonshine that illuminated the surrounding countryside with dim light. After a while, Josh gives up on trying to convince his friend to sneak out, so he decides to walk around the corner of the house to where his friend James is standing, so the two of them can carry on with their night. As he comes around the corner, he becomes nearly paralyzed with terror. This is what he saw. It was a humanoid creature, but it was sort of walking on all fours. It was completely naked and had its legs inverted at the knee joint, like how birds' legs are. It was walking near the border of the cornfields, seeming to mind its own business, oblivious to the two of them standing there. As soon as Josh saw the creature, he looked to James and said, "Don't turn around." But of course, James turned around. This was seemingly enough to catch the creature's attention, and the creature shot up so that it was standing upright with its arms perched up, similar to how squirrels look when they are on their hind legs. Its skin was chalk white, and its body was skinny, sinewy, lean, and defined. On its hind legs, it was between 4 and 5 feet tall. Its cranium looked slightly larger than a human's, and it had large, shiny, pure black opaque eyes, a small, narrow mouth, and 2 slits in its face for nostrils. Its facial structure was sort of akin to what it would look like if a piece of latex were stretched over a human's face. It took enormous strides, and after about 4 or 5 huge leaps, it was out of their sight, and that was the last they saw of it. I have come across 2 others on the internet that describes this creature exactly. What the hell are these things? A subterranean race of creatures? Extraterrestrials? Extra-dimensional beings? And that is the end of the tale, Weird White Crypto. I think the word the author was looking for was cryptid, because I don't think he was talking about digital currency. Anyway, as the author mentions at the end, they've heard multiple other accounts of sightings of an identical creature. And in fact, the comments themselves hold several other alleged sightings. One commenter named Steve-O writes, "Okay, this is almost too much. A few days ago, I was leaving home on a business trip at around 6 a.m. The morning was foggy and it was dark out. We live by a lake, and at the end of our road is a trailer park and a cornfield. As I stopped at the corner, there is a house right across the road from the intersection, and as I start to make my turn, my headlights of my truck shine upon the exact same thing you have described in your story. The legs were inverted, with upper arms like that of a squirrel, and the skin color was a chalky white. As my headlights hit this creature, it scampered across the back of the yard as to try and avoid me seeing it. I would say this thing was taller than the one your buddy saw though, around 5'6" to 6 feet tall, and slender. The top of the legs were muscular, and it was leaning forward as it moved across the back property line of the yard. Its movements weren't like anything I've ever seen before. It was not a deer or large dog. It had no clothes or fur, and I didn't see a lot of detail, but it shot a chill up my spine that I'll not soon forget. This happened in north central Indiana. Interesting to note the same month your friends saw their creature." At least 3 other commenters report sightings. One of them is even the author of our second story. The title of this episode is called Backwards Knees, and several of the authors of our stories have given chickens as examples to describe the legs of these strange creatures they have seen. We think of birds' legs, like chickens or flamingos, as being backwards compared to a human's. In reality, that is not the case at all, and the knees of a bird do not bend the opposite way. The part of a bird's leg that we think of as being the knee is actually its ankle. The bird's knee is much farther up on the leg, and it's usually concealed beneath its feathers. It's the same with the back legs of a cat or a horse or a dog. The only difference between many other animals' legs and a human's is the distance between the joints. If you were to try and walk on all fours, you would find yourself lifting your ankle off the ground. The human knee and ankle are positioned the way they are because it is best for upright bipedal walking. However, there are many cases and conditions that may cause the knee joint to deviate from its usual function. Some are common, such as hyperflexion, and others are quite rare. Famous sideshow performer Ella Harper who had a condition called congenital genu recurvatum, was known as the Camel Girl. She found it most comfortable to walk on all fours, and her knees bent backwards. Ella was only in the circus business for a few years and made a considerable amount of money doing so. However, her life surely was not easy, although not because of any direct cause of her backwards knees. Although she made a fortune while working at the circus, let's not forget that the segment where she worked are famously called freak shows. Her money and fame were made off of people seeing her as a spectacle and not as a fellow human being. The thought of a person having backwards knees unsettles you, right? That is, after all, why I chose the theme. There's a historical narrative that people with disfigurements or disabilities are scary, monstrous, and even inhuman. In stories, characters are given disfigurements to mark them as evil, villainous. Countless examples of this archetype exist, from Freddy Krueger, the Phantom of the Opera, and many James Bond antagonists. This archetype even has a name, the Evil Cripple. Fairy tales and folklore are rampant with ableism as well. Common parable punishments include blindness or being stricken with other disabilities or illnesses. Conversely, those who are considered beautiful are inherently good, trustworthy, just, and heroic. And why is it that disability and disfigurement is so feared and reviled? Most of it has to be socially influenced. Eugenics practices and prejudices go back centuries. This fear has become so ingrained in humans that a recent neurological study showed that people's brains react negatively to being shown pictures of facial disfigurements, even when those being tested seemingly had no conscious prejudices going into the study. But disabilities are just differences. Not only is it a myth that those with physical differences are evil, but also that their lives are that of suffering and misery, and that the way they live is fit only as a punishment for the morally corrupt. But that is just not true. And individuals with different abilities, and however they choose to term and claim them, live rich, meaningful, and beautiful lives. In fact, I'd bet the biggest challenge in differently abled people's lives are so-called normal, able-bodied, or average people, and the world that has been created to suit mainly their needs and desires. Those who differ from the accepted idea of normality and beauty suffer bullying, ridicule, disgust, exploitation, and a complete lack of representation at the hands of those who have been classically deemed as trustworthy and just. I have one more story for you tonight. This one is called Corner Creeper. From youngest childhood, as long as I can remember, I had this thing that lived in my room. I was the only one who could see him, but others would feel his energy and it creeped them out, or in a few cases, frightened them so badly they couldn't be in the room when he was. He normally occupied a corner of whatever room he was in. He was rough looking, scaly, dirty, sparsely haired, with an unnaturally wide face, and his knees worked backward, holding him in the corner. His features were never super clear, so I can't really describe his face much more than the shape of it. While he could be felt as scary, creepy, or downright hateful by others, I always felt comforted by his presence, and when he was not there, it seemed to be off to me. He would be there for weeks at a time, then be gone a few days, and return looking almost refreshed. I felt protected by him, but others hated his presence to the point where my mom tried techniques like trapping him in a dark mirror, smudging, and banishing. None of it ever worked, and he always returned. We lived in motels, apartments, shelters, and no matter where I was, he always found me. He watched me. Never said anything, never came down from his corner, never tried to communicate, save for once. when my brother came into my room in an apartment suddenly, and I saw his head swing quickly from me to my brother. He saw my brother, but my brother did not see him. He stared at my brother, almost angrily, until my brother left the room, and then he resumed watching me. I could tell if he was feeling something, and though I tried many times to talk to him, he never showed he could even hear me. He stopped showing up when I was around 20, and I haven't seen him since. He was not human, but humanoid, and his joints worked the wrong ways. He had long arms and legs, and a rather short torso, so standing up I can imagine he would have looked rather odd, with his small torso, long limbs, and wide face. There is something about corners, especially ceiling corners, that have a strange and ominous energy about them. The author of this story makes it clear that they don't call this creature the Creeper because of how it made them feel, rather because of how it made others feel. What a strange little creature, and a fascinating account. Could it have been the imaginary friend of a child who was going through a lot of stressful relocations and changes of environment? I have no clue what the corner creeper might be, but there is another interesting folklore creature I found that I'd like to share with you, called the Imbunche. These creatures are specific to an island off the west coast of Chile, called Chiloé. Imbunche are grotesquely disfigured children that have been abducted or sold to the local warlocks and made to be their servants. The Imbunche's right leg has been bent around their back, with the foot curling back behind their head, and they shuffle along the ground on their hands and the remaining leg. Their tongues have been forked to resemble a serpent's, and because of this they cannot speak, but can only make guttural sounds. Other body parts may be twisted as well, a process the warlocks begin on the Imbunche when it is obtained as a 9-day-old newborn baby. Toes, fingers, nose, and even the head are twisted and turned in opposite ways. They can also be covered in long, black hair, and they move about by hopping. The Imbunche are used to guard the warlocks' caves and enact their revenge. These creatures also serve as an urban legend regarding young women becoming pregnant. Parents may warn their daughters of the Imbunche so that they don't go out alone at night, for those who come across the Imbunche wind up with child. Although today we can recognize the sexist connotations of this myth, the story of the Imbunche is fascinating. Because not only is it a classic boogeyman figure following the urban legend formula of don't do this because if you do, this bad thing will happen, it also serves its purpose as explaining away or covering up societal taboos regarding childbirth out of wedlock. When a woman did become pregnant and did not want to say the name of the father, whether it was because they were unfavorable to the family or even a member of the woman's own family, they could just say that the pregnancy was caused by an Imbunche. That is all I have for you tonight. I hope you enjoyed the stories and creatures and musings. Until next time.